I've thought about God, that when I think deeper about it, it's like, oh, if I did any of those things, then I'm a monster parent or a monster husband. Love and forgiveness is conditional. And I'm like, can't God be better than me? At my best, am I better than the God I believe in? And I think that's true for a lot of people. I know people that are better parents than the God they believe in.
If you are looking to move forward in your life towards your authentic dreams without sacrificing your emotional health, your nervous system, your relationships, or your spiritual health, well, you are in good company. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is a safe space for creatives. This is the Heal Create podcast. Welcome to the Heal Create podcast. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney. I'm glad you're here. And I am excited to talk to my friend. Do you have deja vu?
Yes.
We have had this conversation before.
Once more.
Completely. But we didn't know that it wasn't recording. So here we are again. I would love to introduce you guys to my friend, Zack. Hey, Zack.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
You're welcome. Zack is one of the hosts of the podcast. Bibles, Bros, and Beer. Bible, Beer, and Bros.
Bros, Bibles, and Beer.
Gosh,
we did this.
Dang it.
Everyone does this. You're not alone. It's not a problem. I'm used to it. Bros, Bibles, and Beer. I hate the name. Part of me hates the name.
I know.
Anyway, but three good friends having serious conversations on faith and culture without taking ourselves too seriously is sort of the tagline we're working with. So
yes. Oh, that is a good tagline. Well, and it's literally a perfect description of what you guys do and what it actually is.
yes, unless the listener's thinking, oh, bros, they're a bunch of Theo bro Calvinist types that want to keep women down. That's not the case. We're bros.
No.
Like we're brothers.
Right. Like, yes.
Just real bro friends. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I knew that I wanted to have you on the podcast when I listened to a few of your guys' episodes, and I heard that your take, all of your guys' takes are different, wouldn't you say?
For the most part.
And the people that you guys have on are kind of across the spectrum of like Christian belief, and right?
We try. I mean, there's going to be some crossover, but I'm kind of a heretic depending on who you ask, and Jeff and Andy are a little more, well, Jeff is more classic evangelical and Andy's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And, we're all growing and changing, so you never know where we'll end up.
It's true. Which actually, I think about that like 5 years ago, if like the things that I believed 5 years ago, I'm like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'm like, wow. And I'm like, in 5 years from now, I'll probably say that about where I'm at, which I think allows me to hold this whole journey of understanding faith and like wrestling with the mystery of God with open hands, because we're always changing and growing. And so I was on the podcast last year, got to experience the strength of your listeners and their feedback. Also learned a big lesson about how loose to be on a public space.
I love it. And in case people don't know, Courtney is the most viral reel/YouTube short we put out talking about our least favorite worship songs and why. And I must have edited it perfectly because it hit the algorithm and you caused a stir. But I think mostly it was the fact that you said an F-bomb that I bleeped out, but it was apparent what you said.
Yeah.
And people they hate that. I think people they care less about somebody being honest and real and more about checking the correct boxes. And it was an incredibly honest moment. And maybe we're probably like 2/3 through that episode. So you're feeling good and
totally
comfortable. And I'm sorry for any pain that caused.
Well, and you guys were like, it's chill. It's a conversation. You can say whatever, like we cuss, which I do cuss with my friends occasionally. And I just didn't, I think I feel like the funniest part of it was when you said, yeah, the way that it was edited was just made it get a lot of attention. And I'm like, who edited it? And you're like, me.
And now my intention wasn't for
I know. I was fine.
the shit to hit the fan, but it did in a way. And the funny thing about YouTube algorithms is that one found an audience, people that would never listen to us. They would see the name and never consider listening. And so they would go through the entire life blissfully unaware that Bros, Bibles, and Beer exists, but somehow it gets in front of them and
they got a lot to say.
And then they have to comment on it.
Yeah. Do you guys ever get comments like, when you cuss, he should really be reading the Bible more? Or is that just a woman that got that comment? She should really be reading Psalm 30. No, Proverbs 30 more often.
Is that Proverbs 30?
Is it Proverbs 30?
I don't know.
Yes.
No, we get, there's been other ones with cussing, and you get that. And we've also talked multiple times, it comes up about whether you should cuss or not. And the joke is that I exposed my kids to terrible movies at an early age.
Right.
And it's a little, dramatic. We play that up a little bit. I'm not a monster of a parent, but I have had conversations from early age with my kids, my two girls who are 16 and 17 now, but from a pretty early age, about how there's almost no wrong words. It's how you use your words, kind of a thing. So teaching them the context, which is way more important than the way we orient letters to spell out words, because words that are offensive change depending on the culture and depending on the time. So
yeah,
perfect example, fanny is a terrible word. If you're in England, use that word.
Oh, right.
And over here, it's a cute word for tush or whatever, or fanny pack.
Right.
But over there, it's essentially saying the C word over here.
Right.
Which over here, the C word is terrible. And in England, they drop that like it's a comma. So,
yes. Well, it's interesting because last week I had one of my colleagues on, and she was talking about modesty and how in other cultures, it's like she was in India and she had like this full, you're like showing your midriff, but like if you show your feet, it's like, it's like a totally, and the different cultures have different like relationships to all of that. So, well, ultimately, and this isn't about me, but it was really good for me. And just to get used to whatever criticism, like there's a rap song that's like, if you don't have haters, you're not playing the game.
That sounds right.
And I was like, yeah, I'm playing the game.
Also, it turns out the internet is big and it's real. Like our podcast occupies this little humble slice of the internet, and occasionally stuff can get out to a wider audience, and people that spend their time commenting, whether it's on social media or on the internet or YouTube, it's not always the most articulate people that you would want to hang out and be friends with. They're they're people that are probably on average messed up and should be focusing on inner healing of their own, but it's easier to just lash out at other people to make yourself feel better. I think that's a lot of what you got, was super judgmental self-righteousness.
Very angry people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it was just an opinion that might change, and it's an opinion I agree with. If people end up checking that out or looking for it. Yeah. What was the name of that song? I can't remember. We don't have to say exactly what you said,
I can't remember.
Oh, I couldn't earn it. I don't deserve it.
Yeah, it was Reckless Love, which I do stand by. Like, and I think people on this people that listen to this podcast know that. Which is why I wanted to have you on. I am, for somebody like myself and my husband who have gone through just a major faith rearrangement after a lifetime in faith and church and ministry, and then stepped away and really wrestled with everything. We are back in a church, and I deeply believe in the potential of church and just the beauty of what it is, even sometimes now and sometimes isn't. But I even with leading worship, like there are songs that I won't lead. And so my point was like, that's a song I wouldn't lead, because I wouldn't lead people to sing I don't deserve the love of God.
Yeah.
Ever. I would for
Yeah.
so many reasons. What it does to your brain, what it does to your sense of identity, what it does to so many things. I would never do that.
And you guys are parents, I'm a parent. If my wife and I communicated to our kids that type of affection, kind of like making sure your kids know that they don't deserve your love, like
Right.
you're a monster parent.
Yeah.
And
totally.
I had that view of God, kind of not thinking about it deeply in the past, and just taking the time to unpack that and get rid of it. There's so many ways I'll just make this about myself. So many ways.
Yes, please. You are the guest. Please
I've
make
thought
it about yourself.
I've thought about God, that when I think deeper about it, it's like, oh, if I did any of those things, then I'm a monster parent or a monster husband.
Totally.
Love and forgiveness is conditional. And I'm like, can't God be better than me? At my best, am I better than the God I believe in? And I think that's true for a lot of people. I know people that are better parents than the God they believe in.
Absolutely.
And better husbands than the God they believe in. And
they would be mortified to imagine their kids being treated the way that we encourage ourselves to posture ourselves in front of God.
Yeah.
All the time.
And it might be silly, but right now, well, it's not silly, but it's different. Depending on the context, I will perform for people if I know the context requires it. But generally, if prayer is happening, I'm not closing my eyes and I'm not bowing my head, because I right now don't see God as like, you will submit. I know bowing your head in front of like royalty is kind of where we get that, like somebody that's so important, you show honor and reverence. But if God is just a good father, and a good mother, but if God is just the best and agape love, there would be no requirement of like, come on. Yeah. I love you. You don't need to do that. So I don't take anything away from people doing that. But right now I kind of want to live in I'm just loved and accepted, and that's it.
Yeah, totally. Well, okay. So that's why I wanted to have you on, because I'm really fascinated and hopeful that there are people still out there that have walked through questioning and wrestling and rearranging their faith and are still here.
Yeah.
And are still like doing it. And I don't know a lot of people like that personally, especially not on public platforms. I feel like it's taken me a few years. Honestly, that clip that went viral was a really good like initiation into like, well, this is the worst that can happen.
Yeah.
And we're fine.
Yeah.
And so I feel like to listen to you be so open and honest about the things that you are thinking about and struggling about, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And it was cool to go to a church where like, this podcast is, you guys are all like a big part of the church that we go to, and everybody kind of knows that you're a heretic.
Yeah. Well, not everybody,
Just kidding.
But and like being involved with the worship team and playing worship songs that
Zach's an incredible musician.
That's very generous. Thank you. But I'm good enough. How about that?
There you
go. Playing songs where lyrics I wouldn't necessarily agree with is, it's been weird, but the people at the top know I'm not a huge worship music guy, but playing with people I know and love, united around one purpose, like whether the lyrics are perfect or not, they might be perfect for somebody in their moment that needs to hear it. And when you're the campfire effect, when everybody's sitting around a song or singing songs around a campfire, and in worship context in church, like at its best, you'll create kind of that vibe where it's like, we're all doing this together.
Yeah.
That's a super powerful thing. And
totally.
It's, I think, healthy. It's probably good for your brain and your heart.
It is good for your brain. It's good for your nervous system, and that's a whole rabbit trail. But I want to know, can you like explain your background and kind of what happened before you started like pulling the thread on the sweater of your faith?
Yeah, just growing up, fundamental-ish, but this is like, I'm realizing there are some fundamentalists that are where that word really means something, and we weren't fundamentalists. We were
I can relate to
conservative,
that. Yeah, very conservative.
Christian, South Orange County, Maranatha. I'm 46, I think.
Okay.
I'm 46, so
we'll fact check it.
Yeah, like so just go back 20, 30 years growing up in church. It's non-denominational, Bible believing church, kind of like classic conservative evangelical. So that's kind of like the foundation that I had. My parents that was very progressive from where my parents grew up, which was Church of Christ. Like you too? We must have talked about this. I'm glad we let time go by. Like,
I know, me too, because I can't remember what we talked. Yes,
weeks and weeks ago, and so now this is like still fresh, which is good.
I'm like, oh my God, oh wait,
yeah. No, but it's saying like it's fresh for everyone else. So, Church of Christ, like the super conservative, like barely piano.
Oh, no instruments in my church.
Maybe even
up.
No piano.
They don't believe they don't believe in instruments being allowed in church. They believe that instruments exist.
They don't believe in instruments. Well, I could bring something to show them. And then my dad was Seventh-day Adventist, which is kind of a cult. And so for them to get to where they were at is pretty remarkable. I think they did some fun young adult stuff separately and got all that out of their system, and then had to come back to some sort of anchor point. So I think I don't know exactly how their conversions were, but they grew up in church sort of, but way different, way out there. And so to be in a place where I grew up was pretty progressive for them. But so growing up with that, and then getting married and starting a family and stuff, we lost our first child, Shane, when he was a few months old, from complications from a relatively common like hole in the heart situation that requires surgery pretty close to being born. I don't know the numbers, but it's pretty common and very fixable, but there were complications and stuff. Yeah. So getting hit with that and being let down by authoritative, like the medical authorities and stuff like that.
Right. That
was a big one, because growing up conservative, you generally care about order, and conservative minds just generally care about order and control, and not even in a bad way. It's probably a necessary thing to have. And it gets stripped away in an instant. Like, oh, the people that I trusted, I was always, whenever somebody from the medical team or whatever, they say something, it's like nod and smile and say, yes, you're the person that has the authority in this situation. I'm going to be subservient to that.
Which religion does kind of train you for.
Yeah.
To just believe in the authority.
Yeah.
Yes.
The authority of scripture, and then the person that's the pastor who's done all the studying, he knows best. And so it's kind of beat into you unintentionally. Like, it was never, I don't have any wounding over like abusive authoritative figures. It's just kind of, it's the water you swim in. Yeah.
There was just no self-trust that was taught.
Yeah. So losing that, and then sort of being a politically dialed in animal, seeing people that I would trust, it's sort of that, just the authority in general getting pulled out from under me.
Not being able to trust the doctors, like recognizing like, wait a second, that was the thread that like pulled the sweater.
And then
up.
Seeing some political figures that I liked talking away after losing a kid. So this is what happens. Like, you lose a kid and you feel that pain. Then I'm a 9 on the Enneagram, so I can't separate. Sometimes like I graft onto other people's pain and I kind of absorb it. And at my best, I can handle it. But in my worst, it's like I feel the pain close to what they're feeling.
Right.
And so some politicians talking about war and bombing and taking over countries, I just started to think about like, yeah, we're not just killing bad guys. Bad guys have families and families that don't deserve to die. And just hearing kind of the callousness with which we're talking about, taking out Libya or whatever it was, it just sort of popped the bubble of like trusting any authority in my life.
Conservative.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so the thread of deconstruction for me started on the political end and kind of unpacking Republican first. One thing I know I said to you before, but I need to mention again is I have an uncle that when we would go for Thanksgiving and Christmas from a little age, back when he was strong enough to like throw me and my brother in the air, he would pick us up. We're just these little kids and he'd be like, he had us trained. We'd walk in, we'd see him like, Uncle, and he would grab us and be, who are we? And he'd like throw us in the air and we would yell back, we're Republicans.
Yeah.
And so like politics and religion, everything was mixed together. And in a way that's not, I don't like it that much now, but it wasn't abusive or anything, but it's just kind of the indoctrination you do when you're a political partisan and you're raising kids. You want to teach them what you think is right. So it's a natural extension of that. So pulling away that the politics stuff started the like, where are some other authorities in my life that need to be looked at in a different light, kind of a thing, if that makes sense.
Which can feel really scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it felt scary for you, but yeah.
I don't think I knew what was happening at first. But it's just all of a sudden you start to question things more. And for Christians of that variety, it's not even like Jesus is the ultimate authority. It's the Bible is the ultimate authority.
Yeah.
And so, and I liked the Bible, but it caused me to look at some Bible narratives in a different light and to kind of dig into the Bible in a way I hadn't before. Like when you're a kid and you teach memory, like memorizing verses, it kind of builds into you that each verse is of equal weight because you're just picking a verse and memorizing this verse, like John 3:16 or whatever, Romans 3:23, maybe a psalm here and there.
That's a good point.
And so you're just like, oh, this is this verse. It says it there. It's authoritative. And this verse over here is authoritative. And you're missing a lot of context. Yeah. And so that was tough, was realizing like, oh, maybe the Bible isn't inerrant, which I think is the thing that once conservative Christians come to that place, you're sort of taught like if you can't trust one part, you can't trust all of it.
Yeah.
And so then throw baby Jesus out with the doubt bathwater is a term I think I made up, but because it's like it's all or nothing, and then if you can't,
if it's all or nothing on the flip side, on like this is my whole life, then when you start to deconstruct it, it's like, oh crap. Yeah.
Did you guys have that?
Yes, our experience started with my healing journey when I started to learn about trauma and how trauma affects the body. And a lot of same as you, born in Church of Christ, super conservative, was raised in, started going to a Vineyard youth group.
Okay.
Whoa. When I was in high school. So that's how I met my husband. And we started leading worship at.
And Vineyard is pretty charismatic.
It's very charismatic, yes. Yeah. And it was like sort of one of the original like Christian music worship movement.
Sorry, Bethel.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Hillsong.
And it was very like expressive, and it was great for me at the time because I was so like sheltered, and it was a great fit for me. But
all of a sudden you're free.
Totally. And free to sing. It was the first safe place that I could sing. I still feel safest singing on a worship stage. And it's because it's not about me, it's about God. And that was just how I came into singing in high school. So when fast forward, we had been worship leaders. We were worship leaders for a couple different churches, worship leaders on a huge mega church stage. I had like a postpartum panic and depression and anxiety really intensely when I was 30 after my second son was born, and I had no idea what was happening to me. So in hindsight, I'm like, I had a lot of childhood trauma that I had just tried to forget about. And then I had no tools and no language around emotional health at all.
Yeah.
And that can only, technically it's called your allostatic load. It can
Okay.
only, you can only
Wait,
hold.
can I write this down? Do you have a pen?
Take notes. You could only hold so much for so long before it like kind of affects your mental health. And so I ended up in the hospital for panic attacks. And the next few years after that, especially immediately after, what was the context that I was given was that this was spiritual warfare, that Satan is trying to take my big destiny, because I was like more of a public, worship leader.
Yeah.
And that, I just needed to double down. And I did. And I have shared this before, but it made me a really good worship leader because I was just like screaming back the darkness every Sunday.
Yeah.
And then having like panic attacks when I would get home. So then we like really doubled down and went to ministry school in Reading, which I think a lot of people find themselves on that. A lot of creatives and emotionally sensitive people can really like get caught up in movements, and that is what happened to me. Not that I think that it was necessarily I don't think it was a fully bad movement or church. I still love so much about what that was. But that was one of the big motivating factors for me, was like, okay, like if he's trying to take my destiny, I'm going to take it back.
Yeah.
And so we moved. And when I was there, I just completely fell apart. Like I couldn't like function. I was like,
It was getting worse.
It was getting so much worse. So then I started trauma therapy, and I remember like just completely like reading so many trauma textbooks, and like everything I was reading was like, I remember reading The Body Keeps the Score in my second year in ministry school, which is about like how disconnection and pain and unprocessed wounding, especially as a kid, collects in your body, and how it can manifest in all these certain ways. And I'm like, we're learning about like deliverance and about the demonic and the force of, darkness while I'm in ministry school. And then I'm reading this textbook that like, actually, this is the human body when it is trying to make sense of childhood abuse or whatever. And that was my...
Some light bulb moments.
Huge. And I don't know that it was necessarily like trust as in these people are manipulative. It was more a lack of trust of like, these people aren't educated on what's actually going on with the human body. And so my lack of trust came from like, which I still do believe the church needs to update its emotional healing modalities.
Yeah.
Majorly. But that was the thread in my sweater. And there were so many good people, and there are so many good people, but we did walk away for a couple of years not knowing if we were going to go back, just because it seemed like all I could see for a while was like I think unintentionally abusive nature of not informing people or being a truly safe place for the human body. Yeah. So that's how we found ourselves like deconstructed. And then there was a point, and I would love to know for you too, there was a point where we were like, all the boxes were open, and we were like, what do we want to do with this? Like, which we had friends. Did you have friends that you also went through this stuff with? We had friends that like, we walked through this journey and they walked away, and they are fine and good outside of the church. Have you had that?
Interesting. No, I had my periods of time where I was less involved with church and not playing as much, declining more invites to play worship. But it was kind of, I had guys that I trusted that were very much where I was, that I would pick their brains about questions like
secretly passing a note,
kind of like texting, like a guy that doesn't live in the area anymore, but used to. And I love him, still good friends with him, but I would just start to bring him all the Bible. He was like one of the more knowledgeable Bible guys I knew. And so when I started to have questions about the Bible in a way I didn't have before, I would pick his brain, and just the answers like were increasingly unsatisfying but I didn't have anybody else that we were close to that was also deconstructing. Like nowadays I don't know if we've reached peak deconstruction. I think there was a little bit of a movement of like all of a sudden people realizing, oh, we can question things.
Right.
And so you have religious institutions and conservative influencer types that are like trying to stop deconstruction or explain it away or say like, no, here's what it is and here's why it's dangerous. Alyssa Childers, I'm thinking of.
Jackie Hill Perry is another one.
Okay. Yeah, that name sounds familiar. I was Googling quotes about deconstruction before today, and one of the ones that popped up was she has this book, Deconstruction of Christianity, what it is, why it's destructive, and how to respond.
Yeah.
And it says, when we use the word deconstruction, here's what we mean. Faith deconstruction is a postmodern process of rethinking your faith without regarding scripture as a standard. And I think there's a sense where that can be true, but the way some of these people talk about it, it's like once you're deconstructing, it's like one thing and it's the same thing for everyone. And I don't think that does it justice. Like I never thought about what I was going through as deconstruction at all until after the fact. It's like, oh yeah, that's what people call deconstruction. And I'm a human being and I wasn't saying off with your head, God, I'm done with you. Right. I was trying to thoughtfully process why I was feeling pain. Cause for me, it was painful. It was a version of losing a loved one. Yeah. Some people describe it that way. A lot of grief. Yeah. A lot of grief. And also you're mourning. This actually happened years after my son's death is when this happened. Cause I think we were so supported and so loved by the church. And it's actually the same church I'm a part of now, which is just, it's wild how that works out. And that church has grown and the people that were involved with it have grown. I'm not just talking about numbers wise. I'm talking about in their ability to handle people with different views or different ways of expressing faith. And so it's really kind of remarkable when you think about it. And my wife and I just giving each other the space to process in our own ways, was that combined with the support of the church. I can't imagine going through that without being involved with some sort of group, whether it's a church or not, but just having some community to come around you, because it probably saved our marriage. And I would never think looking back that our marriage was ever an issue, but the truth is more often than not, they after the death of a child or something like that, you just can't survive that. Right. Especially when you mourn differently and you grieve differently and you're sort of taking turns being like, okay, I can see that, like for her, it'd be like, I can see doesn't have it today. Right. I'm going to take care of shit. Right. And vice versa. And it was just a beautiful thing. But anyways, where were we? Oh, Alyssa Childers. Yeah. I think there's like this, yeah, I think it feels dangerous, deconstruction, and we don't want to lose our kids to it because, again, we're taught all or nothing. And Alyssa Childers, apologetics people are very much like, it's all or nothing. The Bible is all authoritative or none of it is. Yeah. And I think that's a huge mistake. And that's why people lose their faith, or one big reason. It's because they're taught that. Yes.
And what you're saying is like you came across the process very like honestly and genuinely, which I would say the same. And I don't know, sometimes I'm like, I have been very confused and sad to come across people that have been so scared of my journey when like the questions were coming up for me like without me trying. It wasn't like I was like, you know what I want to do today? Yeah. I'm going to destroy my worldview. Yeah. It was like, I don't want to lose my foundation. I don't want to lose the people that I grew up with. Like, it's just it was a very precious process.
Yeah,
and
all the incentives are in the direction of you maintaining what you had.
100%. And just being like, whatever, I'm just going to not. Yeah. Yes. That's a good way to say that. It is true. And I think, having family members that like were so afraid and so scared at a time when I was actually pretty vulnerable. And I think, and you might say the same, like it was was pretty brave to ask the questions that we were asking at the time that we were asking them. Like everything that we had built in our life felt like it was falling apart. And you're right. The incentive was to just be like, you know what? Never mind. Like, let's just stay.
But you almost don't have a choice.
You don't. Not in authenticity, which being inauthentic will make you sick. And I think like that was something that neither of us could afford to stay in authenticity. Neither of us could afford to stay in authenticity.
That was a lot.
That was a lot.
Did better than I would have.
Yeah. And so what I did notice though is that there was a point in our journey when I felt like the people that I was talking to, we were wrestling with this stuff, which is a very normal, I mean, doesn't Paul say that? Like you have to wrestle with your faith, or like the going through your own process of making your faith your own is like a very important thing to do. But there was a point when I felt like the people that I was doing that with wanted to stay angry.
Yeah.
And ironically, the same things that I was learning about how trauma affects the body and how, thinking, just the miseducation from the church around emotions also showed me that staying angry isn't healthy either. And so I remember being like, even like non-Christian textbooks would say like, a sign of human well-being is a human knowing that they're connected to a sense of something greater. And so that made me like wrestle almost back towards it's
a purpose.
Yeah, it is. And isn't that so interesting? Like that the human being that's connected to a sense of something greater is actually a healthier human being than one who isn't.
Yeah. Which is kind of fun to see, however you feel about not you, but just the royal you or the royal we. Somebody like Jordan Peterson, I have mixed feelings about, but when he talks, he says things like,
I don't know who that is actually.
Oh, really?
I
I love that you don't.
Okay.
Because he kind of blew up way back in the day. He used to be a professor at a university in Toronto, and they had some pretty strict rules. It was when the pronoun thing was starting to come around.
Oh, okay.
About you have to enforcing speech and enforcing you had to refer to people's pronouns, and he's a pretty hyper free speech guy, and so he's like, no, I will not do that. And
he sounds like Yoda.
A little bit.
Yeah.
If you're going to do Jordan Peterson, you do Yoda with a little bit of Kermit the Frog mixed in.
Okay.
And then you're on the right track. It's not a great impression, but it's also not bad. And he's Canadian too. So it's hard to know when you're deconstructing. It's hard. Hard is my touchstone word. Sometimes you need a word that will get you in the impression. Again, I don't pretend it's great. But for people that know, it's not terrible.
Okay.
But for the purposes of this conversation, it's you don't have to believe in God, but your life will be better if you believe God exists, is kind of one of his things. And I think his wife converted to Catholicism recently. I don't know that he has, but he's very friendly with God conversations, and he believes that the world losing God would be very detrimental to the world kind of a thing. So, which is kind of a cool way to think about it. And I think it ties into that purpose, because unless you have a job that requires all of your attention, or you're starting a family, all these things that give us purpose in life that can be healthy and they help us stay on track. Like God is the ultimate version of that, of like, oh, you're living for something more. There's something more going on to life, something bigger than ourselves, like you said. And I think it's why alcoholics or AA or recovery groups, it's God is vague, and it's not always like super specific, like, no, it's God and it's Jesus and it's this interpretation of the Bible. It's more vague of like some God out there, but it's like a touchstone for people to grab onto, which is healthy.
Well, it is. I don't know if it's just because I'm like a creative or like a Enneagram 4, but like that did not satisfy me at all. I'm like, that freaked me out. Wait, does that make sense? Like, I'm not just gonna say, okay, I believe in God, because because it gives me a purpose or because it's good for me.
Yeah.
And I think that I really wrestled with that, so what's interesting is that.
Because it's not a light switch.
Totally.
When you're being authentic, it's not like, I know I was talking about it almost like, just believe.
But
that's how some people think about it.
Totally.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And they don't question it and they're okay. And so if anybody's listening and they're like, ugh, what I learned about that was that kids that have, I think we talked about this the first time we had this conversation, kids that have secure attachment, they have parents that are attuned, that can be with them in their emotion, that are present, that are loving, that are providing affectionate, show value to their kids. They grow up to be securely attached adults. And securely attached adults have no problem believing that there's a force of love that's personal and greater than them and involved in their life. Like, that's like, it's not a stretch. It's like, cool. Like, yeah, totally. And, whether they're Christian or not, like, that to me was really interesting because I realized, I think through, I don't know, like $1 million of therapy, that like
probably felt like it.
Totally. What I was actually wrestling with was my own like very young sense of like insecure attachment. And I think that's a lot of people that are deconstructing. A lot of people that are maybe more creatives, that they're actually wrestling. There's a fear, a wounding in them of being like separated from safety, from love. And so the idea of like, well, just believe because it's good for you feels like telling a kid, hey, even though your parents aren't here, just believe that they are. Yeah. Or just believe you're loved. And it didn't satisfy me. Yep. And so the more that I healed that, the way easier it was for me to reconnect with like some of the most pure and beautiful parts of my personal faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for these purposes, like believe that God exists, I guess it depends on what I think for some people, for maybe Alyssa Childers, maybe it's not fair, but for some Christians, it is just like, no, make the good choice. Don't make the bad choice, make the good choice. Right. It's right here in the book. And so it is more of a light switch type mentality. Whereas I think of belief as like, it's like in your core. It's not something you can fake or just turn on. You can get there through work and therapy and whatever, but it's like true to your core. And that's also why the deconstruction happens. Sounds like for both of us was because something at your core was shifting or was unsettled. And so you had no choice but to pull at the thread. Mm-hmm. And that's what the case was with me. And maybe my friend whose answers to my Bible questions that didn't satisfy me, he would never like shut me down. He would always keep asking questions. God can handle it, kind of a thing. Yeah. And so I was encouraged by a spiritual mentor who, we to this day probably look at scripture and Bible, evangelicalism, all that stuff probably very differently. There's still that allowance of like, be honest and keep searching. God can handle the questions, kind of a thing. Yeah. Kind of like that story in, I don't remember which gospel, but it's when Jesus is asking Peter, do you love me? And Peter is saying, I love you. And when you get the English translation, you get this back and forth where Jesus asks him over and over again. He's like, I love you. Then feed my sheep. Do you love me? I love you. But Peter's not giving Jesus what he wants because Peter can't. Jesus is saying, do you love me? Do you agape me? Like the fullness of love. And Peter's like, I love you, but he's using the friendship version of it or the more base level. And because Peter at that moment couldn't love Jesus the way he should or Jesus wanted or
authentically.
Yeah. But the third time Jesus uses the word that Peter was using. Jesus comes down to where Peter's at. Do you love me? I think the Greek word is like phileo or something, like filet of fish, which was my favorite McDonald's sandwich growing up, which is weird. I know.
So disgusting.
I know. It's probably not even fish.
It's probably not even food.
But that, and actually I was listening, I think it was an N.T. Wright book. I'm working.
Simply Christian?
I don't remember.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
He's got so much great stuff, but that story, listening to whoever voice acted it, I'm not sure if he read it. But anyways, I love it when authors read their own books.
Yeah.
If you ever do an audiobook, make sure you read
100%.
it. But just hearing it, it was exactly what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm on the job working and I'm listening and I'm like trying to stifle tears because it was almost like this warm blanket of like, hey, you're like Peter, you're here now. And I'll be here with you.
Yeah.
Kind of like through this journey.
Yeah.
And it was the closest thing I've had to a mystical experience because I can't, like, I feel emotional now talking about it, but I still can't even describe just the feeling of like, okay, I don't know if I could ever go full atheist because of whatever that just was.
Totally.
So even no matter what I think about the details of how God actually works and exists in this world, or even sometimes I've had to come to grips with what if there isn't the personal God I thought there was. Agape love will save the world. The more people identify with that and make that a part of their existence and teach their kids to do it in their communities. So, and the Bible does say that God is love and it's using agape.
Yeah.
And if you listen to, or if you read Paul when he's doing the famous wedding verse, love is patient, love is kind. It's like, if that's what God is, then whether God is real or not, and I tend to think God is real. If my mama hears this, don't worry. But it's almost like that lifeline of like, whether or not love is real, love will transform the world. Love will save the world, and God is love. So that has been what has become like enough for me.
Yeah.
And so whether I can check the box of like, is the Trinity the way they decided it was in the councils, and is there a physical resurrection of Jesus? Will he physically return? Like, I mean, I probably have opinions on those things that have changed over the years or might change again, but it almost doesn't matter because it's like, I can't control that. I don't know whether that's real or not.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful for some of those things, but love is real. And if God is love, God is real. So I don't.
That's.
That. I wish I could distill, if you could distill some of those experiences where you feel like perfectly accepted, because I don't always operate in that, but occasionally it's there. I'd be really wealthy because I could sell it.
If I could just feel so loved, I would monetize it. Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you was, did you have a moment of like, oh, I'm okay? Because I think most of the clients that I work with and have worked with, they feel the same thing where they're authentically like questioning and wrestling with what was told to them to be like the truth that they'd better believe or else. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to burn down their faith or their worldview, but they want to engage in church, and they want to engage in their faith, and most of them are in their Christian faith, but like they're like it's so hard to do, and so sometimes it feels really scary and hard to do. So it sounds like, and it was the same for me, where it was a very chaotic, grief-filled, curious, honest, messy journey that did alarm some of my friends and family, and then I also had that moment. This is probably like the third time I've told you this story, but when I was in church, somebody had invited us to church. I think it was like right when the churches opened back up in 2020. And we went to church and they sang that song, Lean Back. And there was the part of the song where she's like, I thought I knew what love was, but it's better. It's better. It's better. And I just lost it because we were like, a year at least deep into like not like engaging with church and really like asking big questions. And I just felt like just this sense of like, oh, what was actually happening this whole time was I was letting go of religion. I was letting go of what other people told me I needed to believe in order to be loved.
Yeah.
And it just felt like such a relief. And I think all of the things that you're talking about, and I have family members that are very, very deep into apologetics, which is like really knowing why you believe theologically what you believe. And I just feel like it's so not what I'm interested in right now.
Yeah.
And I'll always tell my kids, like, what is the kindest, most wise, loving thing you can imagine God saying to you in this moment? And I think like that's like the crux of like, you know, my kids, especially my teenager will be like, well, I'm just making it up. Am I making up the voice of God? And I get that, and it's really honest. But at the same time, you're opening up. Your imagination is like your most powerful tool, and it can be used for terrible personal suffering. But it can also be used to create new worlds. And I feel like what I've noticed is like just being open to that question of like, if God is love, and we can overcomplicate it, but you're absolutely right. Like God says he's love. Then like, what's the most personal, kindest, loving thing I can imagine love saying to me? Like a parent would speak to a child. And anytime I think about it like that, the answers that come to me they baffle me.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why this relationship makes sense. And does that make sense?
Yeah. I confess I right now I don't do a lot of listening, like what is God saying to me? I more just assume I'm in the river of forgiveness, mercy, and love, and just trying to be aware of that and just try to operate out of that, as opposed to, because we all have friends, and maybe you're more like this, which is awesome, where you hear God's voice and you're listening for God's voice in the way that, you know, most Christians talk about hearing from God. But I was never that guy pre-deconstruction, and in growing up, like I never seemed to have that, and I still don't. And maybe it's because I don't exercise that muscle. That's a possibility too. But I also don't feel the need for it. And maybe it is because my internal monologue or internal thoughts are just geared towards how do I interpret this in light of God being love. And maybe that's the same thing. Maybe it's different words for describing the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah, because I feel like, is hearing the voice of God imagining the kindest thing that God could say, or the wisest thing, or like I think wisest and kindest is probably like the most like accurate way to describe the voice of God.
Yeah.
If he had a voice.
Yeah.
And what if like hearing the voice of God is just trusting that you opening your heart and your imagination to what he would say is an inlet for him to speak to your heart.
Yeah. I can jive with that.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe not. Oh, I told you this last time too, that I was asking my son, Asher, my youngest son, like, what's the kindest thing that you can imagine God saying? And both my kids, when I do this, they're like placating me. They're like, I don't know, like God loves me. Like he's proud of me. I'm like, yeah, I could see that. And then Asher had he tried out for flag football. He was super nervous. And at the end of the day, he's like, I'm like, what do you think God would say? And he was like, I don't know. And then he's like, I think God would say that every time I tell the story, I get emotional. He's like, I think God would say that I'm brave and I'm strong and he's proud of me, but I'm soft sometimes too, and that's okay.
Oh man, that's so good.
And then he like looked at me and he was like, I don't think I made that up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't think you did either.
Yeah.
And I just felt like that holy moment of being like, I think that like we are allowed to use our imaginations, not because we're making stuff up to make ourselves feel better, but I think it's actually like what God intended. That's why we are conscious beings as opposed to other species, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, for the skeptical listener, and sometimes that's me too, it's like, what is the fruit of that interaction that your son had?
Yeah.
Like whether it's real in the way that it is for some people, or not? What is it bringing? Flourishing and healing, and or like laying a foundation of self acceptance. I think a lot of times people hear this stuff and they just assume like, oh, you guys don't believe sin is real, and you think you can't do anything wrong. God won't tell you.
Right.
But any good parent knows there's a time for correction or like steering your kid in a direction that's better than the direction they're going, kind of a thing. So none of us is like deluded. This isn't, it can sound, I think to some ears, it can sound like new age woo, but I don't think it is. And it's like, what is the fruit of it? Is it just self-serving, or are you building your kid into somebody that loves himself and then is going to go love the world in a way that's going to change the world type of thing?
Well, and let's just say this. If imagining what love would say, imagining God's personal interference isn't the right word, involvement in your life is literally, you are creating new neural pathways in your brain that allow your body to relax into safety, and a nervous system that feels safe allows a human body to create and to connect to other people and to love and to the earth and just connection in general, which is, I would argue, heaven on earth, which is what Jesus came to bring.
Yeah.
Then I think that to me is like, this is why I always feel like I'm such a science geek about this stuff. But I'm like, it literally heals your brain and body. Isn't that so interesting?
Yeah.
That's how our bodies are made.
Yeah.
To like imagine and choose love.
Yeah. And I love the science where like science and, well, I think everything is kind of spiritual. I don't think there's like a separation, but
science,
it's easy to think of things as separate.
Totally.
And I fall into that too. But I love it when there's like testable, repeatable things that science gives us. I don't remember where I heard it first, but it was really helpful during my deconstruction and searching. And if it's true, it's God's. Like if something can be shown to be true, it's God's. It doesn't matter the label it takes. Maybe it doesn't have to do with the Bible, but if it's true, it's God's. And that kind of took the pressure off of, no, but this doesn't fit into the box I had for God before, so therefore it can't be true.
Right.
And that, like, I think Christians, we can be so guilty of, well, if it's not if the Bible says it or doesn't say it, that's all that matters. But one of the things I lost about the Bible that I think is good is that God didn't write the Bible. Maybe that's one of my bigger heresies, is like inspiration is a different conversation. And that's probably a huge conversation.
People wrote the Bible.
I'm not saying it's inspired, but people wrote the Bible through their own cultural and historical context, which has been super helpful. So I don't expect the Bible to give me modern understandings of science or history, sexuality, trauma.
Right.
Yeah. They were in their own context. And there's some wild, groundbreaking things for the time and some timeless truths that are in the Bible. I'm not saying that doesn't exist too, but I just don't expect the Bible to be the magic. Like I had a friend who cheated on his wife, and as part of their trying to make it work and staying together, they're still together, they were seeing a biblical therapist, and which is basically the impression I got was the guy would open up the Bible, find a Bible verse about being a husband or a wife, and be like, this is it. This is what it says.
Wow.
This is what you need to do.
Wow.
And thankfully they were also going to a therapist that had been to school for modern counseling and stuff. That was also a Christian, but it was way healthier. But the biblical therapist they were seeing is like, it's like they don't believe in therapy. Therapy doesn't exist. Just read your Bible.
Yeah.
And I think that is destructive. And then if you're taught that and you lose that view of the Bible, off with your faith's head, or some version of that. Yeah.
Well, trauma therapy was ironically, I think, what made me feel more comfortable with the life of Jesus, because you spend a lot of time in trauma therapy learning to imagine yourself as a well-loved child. A lot of time. like the reparenting work that you do in trauma therapy is essential to resolving the mental load of the abuse that you went through.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus walked around saying, I feel so deeply connected to God. I call him dad. I call him daddy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just the first among many brothers and sisters. You also get to call him that.
Yeah.
We are a family loved by a loving parent. And that to me was like, that was absolutely in line with everything that I was learning in not only my own trauma therapy, but then in my certifications around coaching, that like, oh, he's saying what we know now to be true, what science has proven, like a well-loved child grows into a healthy adult that naturally wants to connect and serve the world around him and, create what only he can.
Yeah.
Or she can. And I feel like, I don't know how to explain it to like my apologetics family members, but I'm like, actually at this point, I just don't.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same? It's like, oh, weird, isn't it? This is like the line that I use all the time. Isn't it so interesting that we see the same thing so differently?
Yeah.
And that's just
where
it has
the
to
way
end.
it is.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who is in the middle of their own deconstruction journey? Which, by the way, I think it's clear now. The conclusion of this is that you have found a way to belong and still stay in authenticity and still wrestle with the mystery.
Yep.
And right?
Yeah.
A worthy life, a worthy journey.
I think so. I would not. I understand for people that lose their faith. I totally get it. Like I've kind of probably been on the cusp of it, and actually, it's been fun looking back where Lisa and I are now. It's just slow growth where we're kind of on this journey together, and there were probably times where she would hear my questions and it would freak her out a bit, but I think it caused her to think, and maybe think in a way she wasn't before, because we've kind of both been at the same theological intuition through all this, and there's going to be some differences on some of the details of some of our conclusions right now, but there's just space.
Yeah.
So giving yourself space to grow, and if you're with somebody like who's deconstructing, allowing the questions and the space, because I think when you try to tighten up, it causes somebody to go the other direction if you try to control the situation. So allowing and engaging, and for me, it's just like what is, I want to know what's true, because you mentioned apologetics and your apologetics family. I dove into apologetics hardcore.
Oh, same. James tripled
before,
down.
Like it was this, I didn't know it at the time, but I was trying to defend my own faith.
Totally. Because you didn't want to face the void of what was behind that.
Yeah. But it never totally satisfied. But I think just like letting go. If you love the Bible, you can still love the Bible. Just slowly reframe. It doesn't have to be the perfect answer to all of life's problems, but it can point us to the perfect love of God. And I think I don't think Brian Zond, he's got a church in Missouri, and he's been helpful. He has a book called Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God, and it was very helpful. Through the deconstruction process of just the God that's always loving, constantly.
Resources,
And also he's somebody that clearly loves Jesus and the Bible, and he loves his church. What was I going to say? I brought him up for a reason. Oh, it's right there. It's right on the tip of my brain tongue.
As also with resources, we're both Richard Rohr fans.
Yeah.
That book was absolutely essential for me. Universal Christ.
Yeah.
And understanding.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there were other. I actually do think N.T. Wright at the earlier stages was like a relief to read.
Yeah.
Some of his stuff as well.
Yeah.
I know that there are others, but we can
even
tag some stuff in the show notes.
The original deconstructor, Rob Bell, Love Wins, he took so much heat for that, and I was a part of people giving him heat.
And when you read it now, it's so vanilla.
Yeah. It's literally
like,
just
we were
like,
freaked out about that.
What if God is more? What if the
Right.
Bible is not exactly, what if hell is different than we thought? It's asking good questions.
And they were questions. They weren't conclusions. That's
Yeah.
the craziest thing about that book is it
That's
was a
the
book
genius
of
about
questions.
him.
Right.
And what I think frustrated people about him is because
Totally. Man,
he's
got
not-
canceled so hard.
yeah, he's not like, oh, this is the answer. This is the answer. It's just asking questions guy. We probably all know that guy. I'm just asking questions. They say something crazy. I'm just asking questions. That can be annoying. So
Sure,
I get why people
Totally.
don't like that style, but that was actually really helpful because, you know, you grow up believing in an eternal hell and then you start paying attention to the Bible and you're like, wait, Paul doesn't mention anything about
Right.
eternal hell. Like
Yeah.
if hell is real and people will be tortured endlessly, somebody forgot to tell Paul. But if you're inerrant with your scripture interpretation, you're like, well, but it talks about it other part of the Bible. So therefore Paul believed it. But it's like, no, Paul didn't say it though. Same with like the virgin birth. Somebody forgot to tell Paul about that, or he didn't think it was important enough to mention.
Right.
Again, this isn't throw your Bible out type stuff. It's like, no, Paul was a human being in his own context.
Yeah.
Let's let Paul be Paul and the other passages be the other passages.
Yeah.
So once I learned to let go of needing the Bible to be a certain thing for me and just letting it sort of speak from its own context, depending on the passage, and knowing that was going to be okay.
Yeah.
That was super helpful. I don't remember what your original question was. I know I'm all over the map.
Oh,
but-
I had asked like what you had to say, which I think what you would have to say to somebody who was kind of in the middle of their journey.
Yeah. Giving space to the deconstructor. And oftentimes it's not in the context of like, oh, I am currently deconstructing. I would never have used that language about myself. I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
So, and then if you are the person, just hopefully you can find people in your life that you trust, whether they agree with you or not.
Yeah.
With the questions, and you can reach out to me, DM at Bros Bibles Beer on Instagram. I mean, if you need somebody to ask questions or whatever, or brosbiblesbeer@gmail.com too.
Or check out the podcast,
Yeah.
your podcast, because I think it's a really good example of like healthy discussions between people who believe differently or think about things differently. And I had a client once that was like, I just don't want to become Michael Gungor.
Yeah.
That was like from the Liturgist, which is sort of a famous deconstructor that really ended up going in some wild places. And now he's like not with his wife anymore. And he's done all kinds of
Are they not
things.
together?
No, they are. I think
Or
this
they're
is
sort of together,
public.
but not.
No, they're not. They're living together to raise their kids, but they're not married.
Yeah.
But he also went into all kinds of directions. And I feel like what I would say is for anybody who has that fear of like, what if I do go down a crazy road? I think when I was genuinely focused on connecting with love, which is the direction that I realized I wanted to go in when I felt like anger was not leading me to healthy places.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like our life genuinely gets healthier every season.
Yeah.
And it's been like the most beautiful and confusing, but beautiful journey,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. The slippery slope might exist, but it doesn't mean you have to stay on it.
No, and you can always,
Yeah.
You get-
You're not sometimes you feel out of control, and I've been in there, but I think if you're just honest with yourself, like be honest with yourself and where you're at, and don't try to fake anything. Just be true to yourself, man. It's funny. I'm talking in ways that previous me would have thrown up a little bit.
Well, on
And
that
depending on who
note-
I'm hearing it from, I hear some of that stuff. I'm like, I don't know if I believe you.
Yeah, right, totally. Yes.
So-
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation a
Yeah.
second time.
Yeah.
So glad
Thanks
you're
for having
here.
me back.
Guys, check out the podcast and
Beers, Bibles, and Brubbles.
there. And we'll see you next week. Bye.